Creation Science 114, we're going to be taking a look at dinosaurs. Did dinosaurs walk with man? And we had this poster at St. Cloud State, come and see the evidence that's been censored from your science class. Come and think for yourself, and that's what I really want to do, get people to see both sides so they can think. And we're going to answer these questions. Where did dinosaurs come from? Or if you're an English major, it'd be, from whence did dinosaurs come? I guess that's the proper way. When did they live? How did they die? And what does this mean? But before we do that, we got some good news and bad news. Who wants the good news first, or who wants the bad news? Who likes the bad news first? All right, we're going to start with the bad news. I tried to get our high school textbook passwords so I could go through their curriculum again, like I did 2 years ago. And the superintendent back then, she said, I asked for it again. She said, well, you can't do it. You can't look at this all the time. I said, well, I want to save this one then. I want to look at it in the future. And I tried to get it, then they denied it. They said, you got to come in and look at them here, which really limits the amount of time you can look at them, because there's a lot of videos that are embedded. There's a lot of, you got to go there every time to get through, and it also really limits somebody who's working. And I think that might not be by mistake. So they denied that. And if you look right down at the Earth's oldest rock was discovered in 2008 along Hudson Bay in northern Quebec. Yeah, that's what they said. That's in the 2024 textbook. But in 2019, NASA came out and said the Earth's oldest rock was found on the moon. And so you can't have both of them be true. And I brought this to the school board, and you can see these. I recorded them, my neighbor did, on Solidify Your Faith. I've got a school board playlist, so then you can see what I said to them. And I brought this up to them, but they didn't do anything. And so I contacted the publisher. And I don't know if they just kind of ghosted me. So I don't know if it's in the textbook now, probably is, but I don't have the access. But what I do know is this page, this NASA article, is taken down. See, every slide I have that goes to refers to the internet webpage, I put the link at the bottom. And so when I put that link at the bottom today, this is what I get. So they took it down, but you can find it at Science, ancient Earth rock found on the moon. The rock formed in water, a water-rich environment at temperature and pressures corresponding to 19 kilometers beneath the Earth's surface, which validates the hydroplate theory. And maybe that's why NASA took it down, I don't know. Then I tried to get a kiosk at the community college, and that was denied. It used to be our creation club at St. Cloud State could get the use of the kiosks whenever they were open. And then they changed the rule. You could use it once a month. And apparently that's too threatening for them, so now we can't use it at all. Yeah, so they're tightening the free speech there. And then I don't know if you remember jousting flood models, where we had the flood model, the catastrophic plate tectonics and the hydroplate experts emailing back and forth. Well, there was another flurry of that because we want to do a Creation Summit. I emailed the famous geologist and said, would you like to participate in the 2026 Creation Summit Flood Model Conference? Your expertise would be greatly appreciated. It's like we need help planning it. We want speakers. And he got back to me and he said, I have no interest in participating in an event that serves to give credence to a hydroplate theory. So he's very biased against that. And so that brought, he said, and how would we talk about it and whatever. So then I asked him, could you explain how subduction begins without resorting to miracles? Because that's part of plate tectonics. One plate goes underneath the other one. And I asked him, could you explain it without using miracles? And 5 emails later, this is what he says. Are you ignoring the reality that I have a PhD in geophysics? I contend that Brown's response is not a serious or acceptable answer. In truth, it is pathetic as an answer. And then he goes on to say that my best current answer for how did subduction begin may be found on page 384 in the Proceedings of the 9th International Conference on Creationism. He didn't send me the link, and so I dug it up, and here it is. And so we type in page 384, and it says the proposed trigger relies on no intermediate mechanisms or hypotheses, but instead upon God's direct supernatural intervention. So it does rely on miracles. And it took him 5 emails to try not to say that, but that's what it is. It depends on a miracle. So I responded and I said, the reality that you have a PhD in geophysics does not make you infallible. It is an appeal to authority, which is a logical fallacy that does not determine truth. Last Saturday I asked, could you explain how subduction begins without resorting to miracles? Why didn't you just honestly say no? And so that's his mindset. He's very, very opposed to this hydroplate theory. And I interviewed Chris Hammett last week. We're getting interviews for the next Hydroplate Week of Celebration. And he wrote this book, Yes, Virginia, Noah's Worldwide Flood Did Occur. And he goes through the math and the physics and all that stuff. And when he was a student at Liberty, he was going for his master's, and he wanted to do a master's on hydroplate theory. And guess what happened? It was rejected by the same guy I'm emailing with. So he rejected it. And one of the reasons he didn't want to give credence to hydroplate was because they don't answer his technical questions about hydroplate. Well, it's like, well, they could have. He could have had a master's there. You know, he could have done it during the master's, but he denied it. And guess what? Now he's the president of Logos Research Associates. And so, yeah. And so I have some more correspondence there, and I emailed, and he doesn't want to do it, but I said, hopefully scientists can unite around discovering truth instead of dividing over sacred cows. And so that's kind of going in the background with the creation movement. I'm trying to get, if there's two theories, let us see the theories so we can think. When they only show one and censor the other one, that's not education. And we should have a higher standard. So that's kind of that's not real good news. The other bad news, has anybody heard of the Epstein files? Anybody seen that? Your news is covering that. Yeah, some news is, some news isn't, I guess. But if you want to get up to speed on that real quick, Tucker interviewed Ian Carroll, where they talk about Epstein and Pizzagate, and so you can get some of the stuff that the news might not be talking about. And then he also had a fascinating interview with Uger. Tucker's got a really big platform on the right side of the spectrum, and Chuck's got he's got one on the left side, and they came together, and it was fascinating. I think we should do that a lot. Let's talk to each other, because they had a lot in common. One, they didn't want any more wars, and two, they didn't want any countries controlling America. It was very fascinating. And then yesterday, Ron Paul was on. I haven't got to watch it yet, but he's usually got some insight as far as education. And and also this book, Dumbing Us Down. This is, because there's a problem with our education system. And it's not just me saying that. This is from a former New York State Teacher of the Year, John Taylor Gatto, who reveals how compulsory schooling creates dependent workers instead of independent thinkers, and replacing natural curiosity with rule-following conformity. And I see what happened, and I stumbled across this. Is from Classical Learner. And it's just dramatically, who had civics when they went to high school? Anybody? You had civics. Okay, who had social studies? I had social studies, yeah. Okay, what's the difference? Well, in civics, you learn about the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, article by article, federalism, separation of powers, Congress, presidency and its limits, Supreme Court and state and local government, jury duty and voting rights, and responsibilities. Who's teaching people about their responsibilities for our society? It seems like everybody's just think they deserve it. But now in the 70s, what are they teaching? Poverty, racism, war, gender issues, environmentalism, global inequality, labor movements, social protest, and media influence. And so then they're very, very easily to manipulate emotionally. They get them emotional, and then they can. So that's what's happening. But the homeschool movement is growing rapidly because of this, I believe. And I think COVID was kind of a eye-opener for a lot of parents. And if you want to see that little blurb, it's only a few minutes long, you can search Facebook, Classical Learning, End of Civics. And that guy, he's really had some good stuff lately. Okay, so that's kind of the good and not so good news. But now we got great news. And I was talking about it before. Dr. Randy Galuza. April 21st is going to be at the University of Northwestern, St. Paul. And so does anybody want to carpool down there? Anybody want a road trip down there? Just something to consider, because this guy, he's a doctor, he's an engineer, and he wants to follow the truth. He's not out there to sell books. He's not out there to promote a brand. He wants the truth to be discovered. And he actually had somebody, had an HPT guy come in and present it to his scientists. So if I can ever drive to where he's speaking, I'm going to go and just thank him. He needs some encouragement, because I think there's some resistance in the organization. And guess who interviewed me on the radio? KVSC, the St. Cloud State radio station. On Monday, they interviewed me, and they're going to broadcast it on this next Monday at 12:30 on their radio station. And so I'm pretty excited about that. And I'm pretty sure he never had an interview like this. But if you want to see it, it's up on my YouTube channel. It's at Solidify Your Faith, and it's about 35 minutes long. And we talk about indoctrination. We talk about freedom to think. Yeah, we talked about a lot of things. And we posted it. Somebody says, lead on, sir. Another one says, excellent. And then I got an email because I pointed out the errors in the textbook and about going to the school board. And Sonia Eisenhofer, she thanked me for doing that. And she said she's running for school board. You know, she wants accurate textbooks. And that should be the big thing. You know, that should be your platform. I want accurate textbooks. They haven't done anything in 2 years about the errors in the textbooks, as far as I know, besides make it harder for me to look at it. And then last month, I was interviewed at KLTT in Denver, that radio station, and you can hear this. My wife and I listened to it live when it was, and it was okay, with Real Science Radio, but then we went into Real Science Radio's YouTube channel, and somebody added these graphics, and we were laughing out loud a lot, just with the graphics. It's amazing how that can add to it. Because I said plate tectonics is on the same level as evolution. And Doug McBurney says, what did you say? And I repeat it, and he goes, I've never heard anybody say that publicly. He goes, did you copyright that? And I said, no. He says, Fred, get that to the copyright office. And that's what's in the background. And then there was another one. Are you confused? Why is the hydroplate theory being censored if it makes accurate predictions? That's a question that I'd really like answers to. That's a question that they don't like asked. But that is, you know, if it makes accurate predictions, let's do this. And then Doug McBurney, he's talking about when Paul set up the churches, you know, and he just set up local churches. He didn't have an overarching authority over them, like a diocese or a conference or a synod or anything like that. It was just local churches. But he said that in the creation movement, we tend to have people that try and tell us what we can and cannot think about. And if you listen to that podcast from Denver, there was a guy he commented on one of my posts, but this was he's kind of poking fun at a power structure because they're not allowing the hydroplate theory in, and he's kind of saying why not? And we ask questions and just help them hopefully wake up at night, like how did subduction begin? You know, and why are we censoring a theory that makes accurate predictions? Why are we taking a secular model that's sped up and promoting that instead of a biblical model? And then this was an image of a girl getting kicked out of youth group because she asked about dinosaurs. And that happened. And this isn't the picture, but we'll get to that. And if you like those images at all, it was Caleb Garza who did that, and he's at oldharvestcreative.com. So I'll just give him a shout out for the work that he did, oldharvestcreative.com, just very talented. Okay, so now let's dive into the dinosaurs. Okay, where'd they come from, when did they live, and how did they die, and what does this mean? And why are we doing it tonight? Why did dinosaurs come up tonight? It's because I've met a lot of people that are very confused about dinosaurs, like my sister-in-law. She asked in the youth group, she asked about dinosaurs, and they threw her out. They said, your questions are causing the other students' faith to be weakened. And then a college student that I met at Northwestern, he wants to be a pastor, and he's teaching second graders at his church, and a little girl asked him about dinosaurs, and he didn't know what to tell her. And a college student, we had a creation club here, and at the end of the meeting, she goes, what happened to the dinosaurs? So there's a lot of confusion. A Sunday school attendee that we were talking to, she didn't know biblically what had happened. And then we were in the nursery, and there's dinosaurs there, and we're playing with the dinosaurs with the kids. And I said, yeah, God made these. God made the dinosaurs. Yeah, and he made them on the same day he made the squirrels. You know, he made the land animals on day 6. And then as we're cleaning up and getting ready for the parents to come, and I said, okay, guys, when did God make the dinosaurs? And the little 5-year-old says, same day he made the squirrels. And he says, and I want to be a scientist. I want to study dinosaurs. And I said, that's great. But you know, there's scientists that don't believe in God, some scientists. And you know how you can tell if they do or don't? And I said, ask them, where did people come from? If they point you to Adam and Eve, they believe what God said. If they don't point you to Adam and Eve, they don't believe what God said. And so, yeah, and then there was a friend, and we went upstairs and talking about it, and that guy didn't know about dinosaurs. And then even a Christian club at St. Cloud, I'm not going to say the name, but it used to have Christ in the title, but they got rid of that. And they had a table there, and I asked them, what would you tell a student who asked you about dinosaurs? There's probably 6 or 8, Christians there at the table. And they just kind of pointed at the leader. They didn't really know what to say. And the leader said, Leviathan? It's like, well, that's part of it, but I explained the dinosaur for them all to hear. You know, the biblical interpretation of dinosaurs is they were made on day 6 with all the other land animals. 2 of every kind got on the ark. They were young dinosaurs, so they could get in the door. And then the flood came and killed everything else that wasn't on the ark. Killed all the dinosaurs, all the people. And that's where we get our fossils. The fossils, the bones, they got buried in mud, they turned into fossils. And then they got off the ark and people called them dragons. And when I had said dragon, that's when my sister-in-law, you could see the light bulbs go on. Yeah, and when you hear dragon, think dinosaur. And then people killed them, and they carved them in castles and temples and in the state parks. And then, so that's the biblical interpretation of dinosaurs. And we have to get that out there because there's a lot of confusion about that. And I was pretty blessed. Just last week, there was somebody from a Bible camp that was at our church, and I asked her, well, you know, if a kid asked somebody at the Bible camp about dinosaurs, what would they say? What answer would they get? And she goes, well, it depends on who they ask. And so I asked her, well, what would you say? And it turns out that she believed they were made on day 6, roughly 6,000 years ago. And I thought, good. That's what I like. And then, I was talking to, at the community college, there was a parent there, and it's either her niece or her daughter was going through confirmation. And she asked the priest about dinosaurs. And I thought, oh, this will be interesting. What did he say? And it was pretty much just believe it because I said so. So the daughter wasn't real happy. So she had a good question. She got a bad answer, so she got a bad conclusion. And that's, so she concluded that either Adam and Eve are false or dinosaurs are false. And how can dinosaurs be false when we find their bones everywhere and their footprints on every continent? And I said, your daughter's real close to kicking the Bible out of her life for the rest of her life. Because Ken Ham wrote a book called Already Gone, and trying to figure out why church kids stop leaving church at the rate of 60%. Some denominations it's 90%. And he did a survey, and they realized the answer was basically they doubted the Bible was true. And then they asked them, well, when did you start to doubt the Bible? And it was junior high and high school. And not coincidentally, that's when the Big Bang and evolution are being taught as dogma. And so now the kid has to decide, am I going to believe what the Bible says, or am I going to believe what the scientists say? And so this is where we have to equip the kids young. They have to start asking questions. With the Big Bang, they have to start asking, where did the matter come from? The scientists don't know. And when they get taught evolution, how did life begin? The scientists don't know. But that's a whole nother talk. But where do they get millions of years? Anybody want to guess? The dinosaurs are clearly 65 million years old. How do you know, that's in all the textbooks, all the museums. How do you think they get that? The millions of years. Yeah, they need it, but what do they justify it? How do they come up with that many millions of years? You know, they'll say that dinosaurs are 65 million years old because we find their fossils in this rock layer, and that rock layer is 65 million years old. And we'll say, well, how do you know that rock layer is 65 million years old? And they say, well, because we find dinosaurs in there. And everyone knows dinosaurs went 65 years ago, or a million years ago. And that is, circular reasoning. And sometimes I did this at St. Cloud State, and the guy said carbon dating. And carbon dating they do not date the bones with carbon because they think they're too old. They wouldn't have any carbon, because if you find carbon-14 in anything, it's under 100,000 years old. So they don't even try. They just assume that it's not going to work. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But what they do is they date like a lava layer, an igneous rock. They can date that, and if something's underneath it, they know it's older than that. And there was a KBS Tuft. They had a layer that was like 230 million years old, and then they found a human skull underneath it. And that really blew them away. So they had to keep testing and testing and testing and trying to figure it out. And they never used a dating method. They just figured, oh, there's pigs in this layer. And we know when the pigs went extinct. So that's how they do it, though. But anyhow. But basically with radiocarbon dating, there's 3 unknowable assumptions. They don't know the initial condition of the rock, like uranium decays to lead. They don't know if there's any uranium in the beginning. They also don't know if the decay rate's been constant over millions of years, especially with our magnetic field declining as rapidly as it is. And then they also don't know if the rock's been contaminated. And what would contaminate it? It's water. Water can wash elements in and out. That's why we don't have lead pipes. And Jay Siegert, he does a really good illustration of this. He spoke at TCCSA. You can see his whole talk on the YouTube channel, or they made highlights of this. And if you want to see a minute-long one, it's Dating Assumptions Made Easy. And then there's another one titled Radiometric Dating Does Not Work, and that's about 3 minutes long. And so just imagine your sink at home, and it's dripping, and you got a cup underneath there. And your cup's half full. And you walk in there and you're trying to figure out how long has that cup been there. And you have to make some assumptions. You might assume that it's always been constantly dripping at that rate, but somebody could have just, turned it on and walked out, filled it up halfway and walked out. You don't know that. The drip rate was constant. They might assume that the glass is empty, but it might not be the case. Somebody could have filled it up and drank half a glass of water and put it down. So you don't know what the initial condition was. And then you also don't know if there wasn't any other source of water. Somebody could have come in and put more water in while you weren't there. So those are the 3 unknowable assumptions that you can imagine at your drinking at your sink. But Walt Brown says 1 experiment is worth 1,000 expert opinions. So when we date rock that we know when it erupted, this lava, like in Hawaii, it was from 1800 to 1959 on that actual age thing. That's when the volcano erupted. The dates should be that old. But when they radiometric date them, they get what? 1.6 million, 22 million, 8 million, 21 million. And that's not the only time. It's in Sicily. There was a volcano that they know when it erupted. It was 122 BC, but you radiometric date it, and it's 250. It's 0.25 million. So that's 250,000 years. Same thing with in 1972 or 1792. It's 350,000 years. In 1915, it was 110,000 years. And roughly 1,000 years ago, it was 270,000 years. So this is not working. And even recently, Mount St. Helens, they took some lava from the lava dome that it erupted in 1980, did all these different types of tests to get all these wild different answers, but it's not even close. 340,000 to 2.8 million years. So that radiometric dating thing does not work. And so if they ever hear millions of years, just ask them, how do you know that? What are you basing it on? Do you know what the unknowable assumptions are that get you that number? Okay, where did dinosaurs come from? And this is going to be, and I talk about this on the interview at St. Cloud State, there's 2 worldviews. One's based on blind chance and one's based on creation. It's like thinking this library got put together by blind chance. That'd be pretty absurd, right? How much more absurd to think our bodies got put together that way. But if that's all people see, they don't think, they just memorize. So where did dinosaurs come from based on your blind chance perspective? And if you go into a museum near Chicago, this is what it says. See all those things? It comes from a common ancestor, right? Well, do they have any evidence for those lines? Dr. Carl Werner says no. And he spent, 30 years going from museums and interviewing scientists and taking pictures of fossils and displays. There's no transitional anything. It's just, what did Matthew call it? It's called wishful thinking. That's all it is. It's just wishful thinking. And so you got these 2 worldviews. Where did dinosaurs come from? Well, if you believe in blind chance, you believe they came from that first single living cell. 4 billion years ago. That little cell turned into all the plants and animals and people that have ever lived. That's what their blind chance perspective is. But if you believe in the Bible, what the Bible says, it was created on day 6, roughly 6,000 years ago. Okay, those are the 2 perspectives. So what's at the bottom of it? Under creation, God made the dinosaurs. That makes sense to me. But under blind chance, dinosaurs came from rocks. It's like, what? That doesn't make sense. Well, how do I get that? Well, here's a college textbook. It's trying to explain how life began. It said most of the rain immediately vaporized again as it struck hot rock, and the hot steamy code of the condensation and vaporization continued for millions of years. So it rained on the rock. And then what happened? Somehow, despite this harsh environment, living organisms appeared. So somehow, the dinosaurs started right then. Somehow.
Scientific.
Yeah, right. Somehow it came from a rock. And that's the thing, when people say they believe in science, not religion, I ask them, well, what do you mean by science? And I said, do you mean like the scientific method where it's observable, testable, repeatable, falsifiable? And they say, yeah. And I said, well, somehow it's not. Raining on rocks for millions of years, that's not science. It's in a science book, I know, but it's not science. So you have to separate the science from the fiction, and that's a whole nother talk. We've got a little bit of that at the end if we have time. But what does the evidence show? Does it show gradual things changing from one thing into another? No. It shows sudden appearance with the Cambrian explosion, and then it shows status, doesn't change. And this evolutionist, this Mark Pagel, he's writing in Oxford, he says, but instead of finding the slow, smooth, and progressive changes Lyell and Darwin had expected, and that's how you tell a good theory. Can it make accurate predictions? They predicted they'd find all these transitional fossils, and they didn't find them. And Darwin says, well, it's because we just haven't dug up enough. Well, now we've dug up enough, and we don't see them. So their prediction is wrong. You know, new species appearing seemingly out of nowhere and then remaining unchanged for millions of years, patterns hauntingly reminiscent of creation. So what they find in the dirt validates what we read in the Bible. They were formed and then they didn't change. They produce after their kind. There might be variation within a kind, but they don't change into something else. Okay, so now when did dinosaurs live? Again, it depends if you believe in blind chance or creation. Blind chance says it's 65 million years ago. And again, they get circular reasoning to do that. And then creation, it's thousands of years ago. And Creation Science 103, we took a look at how old is the Earth biblically, how old is it scientifically. And it points strongly to thousands. But some people will say, well, couldn't God use evolution to make dinosaurs? Well, God's God. God can do whatever he wants, right? But he can't lie. So if he said he did it in 6 days, he did it in 6 days. This isn't a matter of what God could have done. It's a matter of what God said he did. The real question is, are you going to believe what God said? And they try and that's the problem we're having in the church. We're taking secular models and we're trying to squeeze them into the Bible. You know, they take evolution and slap a cross on it. Now you got theistic evolution. You take plate tectonics, you speed it up a million times, and now you got catastrophic plate tectonics. And I think we should start with the Bible. And I think that's where we're going to, especially if it's making accurate predictions. Okay, and so it's very difficult. Come on in if you want. No? Okay. All right. But the people that try to squeeze evolution into the Bible, they're it's illogical, you know, because you can't believe two opposing things at the same time in the same way. That's the law of non-contradiction. You can't have, the earth before the sun like the Bible says, or the sun and stars before the earth like evolution says, like Big Bangers, like blind chancers say. You can't believe them both at the same time. And they'll do mental gymnastics and say, well, we just couldn't see the sun at the time. The sky cleared so the writer could see it. And it's like, okay, how about the whale? Did the whale come before land animals, like the Bible clearly says? Or did whales come after land animals, like evolution says? There was a land animal that went back into the sea. Which one is it? You can't believe both at the same time. And so that's another talk too. But how old are they? Scientifically, when did the dinosaurs live? And this is Mary Schweitzer, when she is a shy paleontologist, found soft, fresh-looking tissue inside a T-Rex femur. She erased a line between past and present. Then all blank broke loose. And the guy looked at it and said, do you realize you've got red blood cells in that bone? And I just got goosebumps because everyone knows these things don't last for 65 million years. Everyone knows that. It can't last 65 million years. And Schweitzer showed Horner the slide. She recalls, Jack said, prove to me they're not red blood cells. He's not real fired up about finding something that's going to cause that geologic column to fall apart. And we'll see that later too. Okay, yet this seems impossible according to prevailing understanding. Everyone knows how soft tissues degrade. If you take a blood sample and you stick it on a shelf, you'll have nothing recognizable in about a week. So why would there be anything left in dinosaurs? Yeah, and they said they found transparent blood vessels. Uh-oh, this isn't happening. Sure enough, vessels all over the place. And they can't last that long. Collagen, they just did a Creation Research Society. I think they did an experiment. Collagen, the longest that can last is 1 million years. And this is supposed to be 65 million years. And I was going to have I forgot to freeze it in time last night, but if I had a water bottle of ice, could this have been brought in here 2 weeks ago? It'd be melted, right? How long can ice last? Maybe a day, right? Okay, but if you had 1 million seconds, okay, 11 days, no way, it's not going to last. 65 milliseconds, 2 years, it's not going to last. Ice isn't going to last 2 years. How about 4,400 seconds? That's the biblical timeline for dinosaurs. An hour and 13 minutes? Yeah, ice can last that long. And that's what we use when we talk about how long will soft tissue last? 1,000,000 years. Dinosaurs are expected to last 65 million? No. Could it be thousands? Yeah. And so let's hopefully hear what Mary Schweitzer has to say.
The laws of chemistry and biology and everything else that we know say that it should be gone. It should be degraded completely.
And when I poked into it, it was spongy. It was flexible and soft tissue.
Flexible tissue from a 68-million-year-old dinosaur?
Blood vessels.
There they are.
Transparent, hollow, pliable, flexible, branching blood vessels that contain small, round, red microstructures floating in the vessels. I said, this is not possible. Do it again. We got another piece of bone. We put it in the solution. We waited 2 or 3 or 4 weeks. Looked again, more blood vessels. We must have repeated that with probably 17 or 18 different fragments of bone.
Is that amazing to find this kind of soft tissue in a fossil this old? And what can the soft tissue really tell us?
Well, it's very amazing. It's utterly shocking, actually, because it flies in the face of everything that we understand about how tissues and cells degrade. It's not something that any one of us could ever predict or hope for.
Soft tissue shouldn't be there. Blood cells shouldn't be there, and yet they are. And this researcher, there's an article from creation.com. He said, I had one reviewer tell me that he didn't care what the data said. He knew that what I was finding wasn't possible. And so she wrote back and said, well, what data would convince you? And he said, none. He's going to believe in 65 million years old, doesn't matter what you find in that. So they will not change that geologic column. Right? Will not, that's the New Testament for the atheist. They will not change that. It doesn't matter what they find, because if they misdated the dinosaurs, they misdated everything. And they can't have that, so they're just going to say, they're just going to plug their eyes and plug their ears and just pretend this doesn't happen, that it hasn't happened. Bob Enyart offered Jack Horner $20,000 to carbon date that bone, and he won't do it. He won't do it. And you can listen to this thing online if you watch this again, but it's on Real Science Radio. It's the August 14th, 2009 show at about 18:15 in there. You can listen to Jack Him and Ha. He does not want to carbon date that bone.
Paleo.
Hello, could I speak to Jack Horner?
Yeah, who's calling?
This is Bob Enyart with KLTT Radio in Denver, Colorado. That's Bob Enyart.
Yeah, let me transfer you over to his office. I think he should be in there right now.
Hello?
Hello, Jack. This is Bob Enyart with KLTT Radio in Denver.
Uh-huh.
How are you doing?
Good.
Jack, I sent a letter to Bob Harmon a few weeks back offering the museum a grant of $8,000 to do a carbon-14 date test of that soft tissue T-Rex you guys dug up. And he said he would forward that to you. And I'm wondering if you saw that or considered it.
Well, carbon-14 doesn't work on something that old.
I understand that, and normally we wouldn't expect to get soft tissue out of a T-Rex skeleton either, but sometimes science proceeds by crossing your T's and dotting your I's, and you guys might have other things you'd like to carbon-14 at the same time. In fact, in the last couple of weeks, I've been able to raise a little more money, so that's up to $10,000 now, that we'd be honored to give you guys if you would consider doing that test.
Well, we can't do that test.
You can't do that.
No.
Do you mean the museum doesn't have the laboratory?
We certainly don't.
Okay, well, we're happy to pay the expense of having a lab do the test in addition to the $10,000 to the museum.
Do you know how carbon-14 works?
Yeah, I'm familiar, and I realize it's useless for anything over maybe 50,000 years or so. But I've done a talk show in Denver for 15 years, and there's a group of folks interested in science Of course, that discovery caught their attention, and they thought, well, it'd be logical to do this, to just go ahead and do it, even though nobody would be inclined to do it, just like nobody would be inclined to look for soft tissue inside of a T-Rex.
Well, and, we're still trying to figure out what it is, what it's actually made of.
Right, exactly, whether it's hemoglobin or whatever.
Well,
Jack, is the amount too small that it's just not worth the consideration?
no, that's not it.
Okay. What if I were able to raise more money?
No, the amount of money has nothing to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
Because carbon-14 doesn't work on something like this,
Right.
your results that you get could be all over the place.
Well, they should be infinity. It should be not datable. In other words, it shouldn't come back saying it's 25,000 years old.
Right.
It should be infinity. And so that'll be a worthwhile...
Well, infinity isn't exactly what you get.
Okay.
I mean, it's like trying to date a piece of concrete.
Right. You
You
wouldn't
have to have carbon in it.
Right. You wouldn't use carbon-14. Now, the skeleton is not fossilized. Isn't that true, or largely not?
Well, the bone is made of calcium phosphate.
Mm-hmm.
Like I say, we're still trying to figure out what the actual soft tissue is.
Right. And see, we were hoping that a test like this would just add another bit of scientific information that you would have at your disposal. And also, in that grant letter, we asked if it could be a blind test with 5 different specimens, and therefore then the museum could test 4 other specimens that you might want to have carbon-14 dated, and so you could put it all in the same batch, and those testing then will pay the cost of that. That'll be free to the museum plus the $10,000 grant.
Let me tell you where I'm coming from here.
Sure.
All right. Obviously, your group is a group of creationists,
Yes.
and the spin they can get off of it,
Right.
doing it, is
Well,
not going to help us.
Yeah. So even though it's just a scientific test, they're not asking for voodoo or anything.
It's not actually a scientific test. That's what I'm trying to tell you.
Carbon-14 dating something with soft tissue in it. Jack, if I could raise $20,000, would it be worth?
I will talk to Mary Schweitzer about it.
Okay. I appreciate that. And how about this? I'll resend you the grant letter with the amount of $20,000 in it. And then you could talk to Mary and we'll see where it goes.
I want to know what group is sponsoring it.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's
I need some really specific details about.
Sure.
And don't just tell it to me straight.
Of course. I've hosted a daily talk show for 15 years. We're on a 50,000 watt AM station, KLTT. Mm-hmm. And there's a local church here, Denver Bible Church, that's offered to help. But we also have pledges from any number of individuals in the Denver community.
Okay.
So we could, if you guys agree, we could send you the check within 24 hours.
Okay. Well, let me talk to Mary, and let me just talk to a few people.
Okay.
Because I don't want to, I can't afford to have it turn into a circus.
Right. Well, I do understand that, and I appreciate your time. So,
okay. I will see Mary this next week.
Oh, that's fabulous. I'd be happy to call you back in 2 weeks from now.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Thank you so much, Jack.
You're very welcome.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
They never do blind tests. They always have to know where you found it, what do you think it is. But these people, they did carbon date the dinosaur bones. This is the 2012 Western Pacific Geophysics meeting in Singapore. They had 8 dinosaur specimens, and they all gave dates ranging from 22,000 to 39,000. That's not millions, but that's what the carbon-14 thing happened, and this is what they found. And if you want to see how they did it, go into on YouTube, go into decontaminated dinosaur bones, carbon-14 dated. And that's where they are, and that's well within the range of the accuracy of the machine that they used. But the abstract was removed from the conference website by 2 chairmen because they could not accept the findings. Unwilling to challenge the data openly, they erased the report from public view. Yeah, so that's what's happening. They just keep sweeping it under the rug because it goes against their theory. And we just need to have enough people realize that we've been misled. And if you want to see where these guys came from, where the labs were, you know, there were some in Georgia, and that's what they found. It's like tens of thousands, not millions, when you carbon date these bones. They just never carbon dated them because they just assumed there wouldn't be any in there. And so, but that's where science is. And does anybody know what this is? It's an osteocyte. That's a bone cell. They grow together. That's how your bones form. And Mark Armitage, he found one of them in a Triceratops horn. And he found a bunch of them, I believe. And he got it published in a secular journal, Acta Histochemica. And he got a phone call. Or he submitted it. He got a phone call and says, "You realize this is controversial, right?" He says, "Yeah." And they published it. And he didn't say anything about the implications. He just said, "You know, this is what I found." And he says, "This is the first report of sheets of soft tissue from Triceratops horn bearing layers of osteocytes and extends the range of the type of dinosaur specimens known to contain non-fossilized material." Yeah. And so what do you think happened to Mark? Yep, they fired him. That's what they did. You know, would he get a raise? Would he get a bonus? You know, he did something nobody's ever done. Get a Nobel Prize? No, they fired him. So then he sued him for wrongful termination, and he won. But he's not teaching there, or he's not working there anymore. So who really won? And there is a witch hunt going on. This is Jerry Bergman. You can listen to him be interviewed at Real Science Radio. You know, he's got 3 volumes of people that have been lost their job, lost grant funding, lost scholarships or whatever, or didn't get tenure because they questioned evolution or they were intelligent designers. And so that's what really bothers me. That's what motivates me. Because I look at the world, it's a mess because there's battle between God's truth and Satan's lies, every area, right? And I think the ground zero for that battle is creation versus evolution. And that's being fought in our classrooms and our courtrooms. Because if we fight it in the science room, we win. They just don't want it to happen. And so that's what, you know, the censorship is there. And yeah, and one of the things, if there's 2 theories, put them both out there. Let people think. Instead of just pushing one as dogma and calling the other one fringe. That's not education, that's indoctrination. And I was able to share that on that KBSC interview. But Mark Armitage, he goes around and he does these labs. If you have 60 homeschoolers and 3 or 4 sessions of it, he'll come and he'll show the kids dinosaur bone. And that dinosaur bone has dinosaur blood. And yeah, and if you hit it with a UV, or maybe it's not blood, but it's that type of structure, and there's that osteocyte again, a bone cell. And then he said, "Hey, where's the dinosaur nerve on that slide?" And people would point at different things. He says, "Let's hit it with UV light," and there it is. So then that's what you zoom in on your microscope, and you go closer and closer, and you just zoom in, and it just gets more and more beautiful. As you zoom in on what God made, it's just beautiful, beautifully sophisticated. And as you zoom in on what man made, you see more of the imperfections. These are his pictures on the cover of Microscopy Today. And nerves cannot last millions of years. And so I had that on one of our posters at St. Cloud State that kept on getting stolen, and I think that's why. I think a professor saw that those nerves would just destroy the evolutionary, they would destroy the geologic column, that whole time frame. And so they risked either their student career or their academic career by stealing. And the interesting thing is that fact they know who did it because the camera was right there, but they won't tell us if it was a student, faculty, or staff, and they won't make them pay for it. So that's what's happening over at State. Okay, did dinosaurs live with man? Okay, the blind chancers would say no, dinosaurs died off millions of years before man popped on the scene, where a creationist would say, yeah, they lived with man. You know, they were made on day 6, just like man was. And what's in the fossil record? I was at St. Cloud State one time, and Micah, he liked to be called Yank, he's an atheist in the atheist club, very outspoken. I said, well, what evidence would cause you to stop believing in evolution? He said, if they found mammals with dinosaurs. Here you go. I had Carl Werner's book right here. There's the mammals with dinosaurs. Who is that? What's his qualifications, you know? But this is what Carl Werner found. He said that paleontologists have found 432 mammal species in the dinosaur layers. Yeah, you don't see that in the museums. And he said that we visited 60 museums, but that did not see a single complete mammal skeleton from the dinosaur layers displayed at any of those museums. Because museums are where the atheists go to get their faith solidified. And if you start putting mammals in with the dinosaurs, that's going to be kind of hard on their millions of years thing. Are dinosaurs in the Bible? Behold now Behemoth. Basically God's saying, look at him, Job. Behold him. Behemoth. This isn't a mythical creature. Look at him. He said, I made what he eats grass like an ox, so it's not an alligator. Now lo, his strength is in the loins, and his force is in the navel of his belly. So whatever this behemoth is, he's got a big belly. And hippos have a big belly, and some Bible notes say it's a hippo. Some say it's an elephant. They got big bellies, but maybe that's behemoth. He's got a big belly. But then you keep reading, and he says he moves his tail like a cedar. Okay, is like a cedar tree. Is that a cedar tree? No, that's not a cedar tree. Those are like branches. The cedar tree is the long-necked dinosaur. He moves his tail like a cedar tree. That's what Job's talking about. That's the cedar tree. And then you got these legends all over the world about dragons. Okay, and just when you hear dragon, just think dinosaur. And this bothered Carl Sagan. It's like, how could all these cultures separated by time and distance describe the same animal? And so it bothered him so much, he wrote this book called The Dragons of Eden, Speculations on the Evolution of Human Intelligence. How could they describe it? And his premise was that our memories are passed on in our DNA, okay, and that's been debunked. But so that shows that things are not adding up for the blind chancers. And this is a temple in Cambodia where it's a stegosaur. And if I understand this right, they didn't know how to put the stegosaur together until they discovered this. It's like, okay, that's how it all fits. And it's got all these other animals that are alive today. And they'll say, oh, that's something is standing in front of a flower or something like that. And then this one is Natural Bridges, National Monument. And Don Patton does this video called Extraordinary Evidence That Dinosaurs Lived with Man. Okay, so now that's what it looks like, and then you enhance it, and that's what you get. And Answers in Genesis, I think they went out there and they had this canvas and they just colored it with a crayon so you could see what was sticking out and what wasn't, and they got pretty much that thing. But now there's a scientist, I think it's Nate Loper, he wants to, he's thinking that it's a snake. So there's different perspectives. And so basically, what did I hear? I interviewed a teacher and she said, she goes, I'm a learning guide. I help people learn. Because if you teach them how to learn, they can learn the rest of their life. But if you teach them what to learn, they can just only learn what you're telling them. So that's what I like to do, open the doors so that you guys can learn. And this is what it says, and this is Mike Snavely.
We've known about a large sauropod dinosaur carved into a rock in a national park in southeastern Utah. I had called the national park and I asked when the best time of day to get a picture of it would be. He suddenly blurted out, all right, the item in question is best filmed at 1:30 in the afternoon at the time of year that you're going to be there. But now I've exceeded my authority. I said, what'd you say? You've exceeded your authority? He says, yeah, that's a level 3 artifact. What's a level 3 artifact? So I asked him that. He goes, okay, level 1 is any object in the national park that you can see and you can ask us questions about. A level 2, we will not tell you that it's here, presumably to protect it. We will not tell you that it's here unless you already know that it's here, and then you can ask questions about it. A level 3 artifact, we have to pretend doesn't exist.
And you can hear him say that on TCCSA. That's Mike Snavely. And then this is Bishop Bell's brass behemoths. There's on the floor, there's a relief of animals going around Bishop Bell's grave inside the church. And that's the problem. They got Darwin inside of the church, buried inside the church, and that's pretty symbolic. You got evolution inside the church. That's not a good thing. But this, it looks like two long-necked dinosaurs with their necks crossed, and it just kind of wore away where you don't see their heads. And then this is two of the most controversial. Did dinosaurs live with people? Well, if they didn't, how would you explain this? Two of the most controversial discoveries in the 20th century are the ceramic and clay figures of Acambro, Mexico, and the Ica stones of Peru. The reason why there's so much controversy regarding these artifacts is that a large number of them are of the dinosaur shape. So they got these carved in stone. And they did tests on it. It's like it's got the varnish from being old. And this anatomically correct. Dinosaurs, anatomically correct. And then notice the circles. Why would you put circles on there? And then this is carved in a castle. This castle was built in the 1500s, and there's dragons or dinosaurs on there. And look at the skin. Notice the circles. They say, well, they're just carving legends. Well, you got to be pretty good to carve a legend to know what its skin looked like, because they find fossilized skin, and it's got the circles. Again, the circles. And it says that skin is something that decays rapidly, so fossilization must have been incredibly fast. Okay, and then they find huge footprints discovered in Scottish coast. And sauropod bones and footprints have been found on all 7 continents, including Antarctica. And Randy Galuzzi would say, if he was in college and they were telling us about this, hey, excuse me, professor, what process today is causing footprints to be preserved? What process today is putting worldwide layers of sedimentary rock? And just start asking questions like that. But we went down to Glen Rose, Texas. Anybody ever been there? Francis, you been to the Creation Museum, Creation Science Museum down there? Yeah. Okay, yeah. That's kind of what started the fire in me. They've got this Dinosaur Valley State Park down there. That's where the Paluxy River, 100-some years ago, there's a big flood, ripped off a layer of bedrock, and there was dinosaur footprints, right? And then Carl Baugh,
after removing the limestone layer, discovered a trail of dinosaur footprints, 19 successive dinosaur footprints. Removed more limestone, and 18 inches from one of those dinosaur footprints, I discovered a 16-inch human footprint. Genuine in every detail. The great toe, which is unique to man, second, third, fourth little toe, metatarsal arch, the ball section of the foot, the medial section, which includes the interior ball section of the foot, and the lateral with a bulge. All of that is unique to mankind. And continued to excavate and discovered 3 more. So a series of left, right, human footprints among dinosaur footprints. I called the press. They flew down by helicopter. The next morning, I got on the plane at DFW to go back to St. Louis, and headlines in the newspaper stated, "Tracks Step on Evolution."
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
And then the battle began.
Oh, yeah. Right. Now, when you found that footprint, that human footprint, 18 inches from a dinosaur footprint,
yes,
in the same layer, what did that do to your mindset? Because were you a theistic evolutionist at the time?
At that point, now, I had graduated from theistic evolution to an old age creation position. I put a gap between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. There is no gap between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. So I was a progressive old age creationist. But it really is in the same camp, unfortunately. So this destroyed my paradigm completely. I didn't sleep for 4 days and nights. And then I went back to St. Louis, and the press started calling and took the news, the controversy, worldwide. And I'd like to say that every honest person has identified with it. They too have to go through a catharsis, a complete change of mindset in order to accept this. And even some very good creationists are hesitant to accept this, because the evolutionist have targeted everything we do, and of course propagandized every false idea they can. But that's fine. We would expect that because this destroys their religion.
It does. It does.
But it supports the true religion and the true God, and the Bible as being the Word of God.
Amen. So he became a young earth creationist, to his credit. This is the museum he's got. It's a Creation Evidence Museum, I believe it's called. And I came out of there and I was upset. It's like, why do I got to go to Texas to learn this? Why isn't this common knowledge? Why doesn't somebody do something? So I thought, well, I'll prepare. And perhaps my chance will come. And it started coming, because inside that museum, you've got a dinosaur footprint and a human footprint. That's not millions of years apart. Yeah, and then they had compression ridges underneath each of them. And they found a hand footprint or a handprint in a rock. And somebody, I think it was Don Slinger, he was talking when he was growing up in Murray County or Nobles County, one of them, but his neighbor had a rock that had a handprint in it. And so he called up some geological society or whatever. They came out and got it. Never heard about it again. So that's kind of hard on the theory too. And also he wants to build this hyperbaric chamber. The other thing that pops into my mind too is your biosphere.
Yes.
And that's, your piranhas grow like 4 times bigger and even bigger than that.
Oh yes, and we're now building a huge biosphere to simulate those conditions before the worldwide flood.
Which would be more oxygen, more air pressure, higher magnetic field.
That is correct. Those are the primary parameters.
Okay.
Yes.
And I heard the piranha outgrew its tank, so it got to be
it did.
It got to be like 2 feet long or so, or
yes, yes.
Wow. What did you do with the piranha then?
We had to give it back, or sacrifice it, and we didn't want to sacrifice it.
Give it back to?
Give it back to the gentleman who gave it to us as just a tiny, just a tiny one. Yes, a little minnow almost.
Yeah. Wow.
And so he put it back in his pond.
Wow. Okay. Well. Roland T. Bird, he is a field explorer for the American Field Museum, and he reported 15 to 20 inch long, clearly defined human footprints. This was back in the 30s. Human footprints in that Paluxy layer. But 15 to 20 inches? And I'm 6 feet tall, and I got an 11-inch foot. I mean, that guy must have been pretty big. And were there giants in the earth in those days? Well, yeah. There were giants in the earth in those days, and after that. And so there was a giant just 100 years ago. This is in Alton, Illinois, Robert Wadlow. He grew to be 8 feet 11 inches, 439 pounds, and his foot was 18 inches. And he lived to be 22. He just never stopped growing. And when he was 13, he was the world's tallest Boy Scout. 7'4", 270 pounds. That's like Shaquille O'Neal or Yao Ming, just a huge NBA player. But there's the trail. There's footprints. And people say, well, they eroded. No, they couldn't erode left, right. Then they say, yeah, they carved them. And so, and I encourage people to watch this. Extraordinary Evidence That Dinosaurs Lived with Man, that's by Don Patton. And then Creation and Symphony, that's Dr. Carl Baugh. And from those videos, you got dinosaur tracks with giant man tracks. That's what used to be there. And listen to the locals talk about it. And they say, well, it must be something else. And it was, I guess apparently the Dallas Crime Lab went out there and said, no, these are human footprints. And they said, well, they must have been carved. So then Stan Taylor removed 6 feet of clay where the path was going into the riverbank and found 9 more tracks in the left-right pattern. Can't carve that. They lived with, those are human footprints. That's how I take it. And some people say, well, this footprint here, the Burdak one, that was just carved. And so then they cut it in half, and there was compression ridges under it. It was compressed where it set down. You can't carve that. And they said, well, maybe somebody just took a dinosaur footprint and carved toes on it, so they cut the toes. And guess what? Compression ridges there too. Okay, so now how did dinosaurs die? Okay, who thinks dinosaurs were on the ark? Anybody? Okay, there's a few. Yeah, all right, yeah. Well, that gives us a clue then. They say, well, how does something that big get on that boat? Well, you didn't have to take the big ones. You took the young ones, so they could still fit in the door. They'll live longer too. So the flood came and killed all the other dinosaurs. 2 of every kind of dinosaur was on the ark, just like 2 of every kind of other air-breathing animal. And there was 8 people on there. And then all of the rest of them died in the flood. And scientifically, it seems to bear that out. Because, those big armored ones, they'll find them upside down. So this was violent. And then also they're in this death pose where they're arched back. It's like that's what happens when they drowned or when they asphyxiate. And then Mark Armitage, he wrote this paper for Cambridge, and he said blood clots in vascular canals. He talks about this. When was that? 2022 he wrote this. And he says, we conclude that the iron in the canals of the crystallized remains of blood that clotted during an asphyxiation event that killed the animal. So they drowned. That's how I take that. And, and also, what would cause land animals to be with marine animals? That shouldn't happen, but yet it does. I just quickly found this one, Tyrannosaurus walking with sharks. The problem is that marine shark teeth are mixed up with land-based T-Rex skeleton. And you find different habitats mixed together, especially those dinosaur graveyards. Okay, so these are questions. Where did dinosaurs come from? You consider it blind chance or creation. When did they live? Millions of years or thousands? Well, look at the dinosaur soft tissue and how they're freaking out over that. And did they live with man? It's like, well, how do you get legends of them? How could they carve them if they never saw them? And how did they die? Well, it seems to appear like a flood. And then what does this mean? Well, it means God judges sin. The fossils are evidence of God's judgment on sin. And this is Genesis 6. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and grieved him in his heart. He said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast and creeping thing, and the fowls of the air. For it repented me that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of God. Okay, so then in the 600th year of Noah's life, the second month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. And they try to tell me that Genesis is poetic, or it's figurative, or it's analogy. This is about as historical a sentence you can make. The 600th year, the second month, the 17th day, this is history. Plus, Jesus always referred to it as history. And then they'll say, well, it was a local flood. Or they'll say that catastrophic plate tectonics, they say, well, the fountains of the great deep was lava. And where did the water come from? Well, it was just tidal waves going across the continents. Well, the Bible says, and the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, and all the high hills that were under the whole heaven were covered. That's not tidal waves. 15 cubits upward did the waters prevail, and the mountains were covered. This is a cubit, okay? And all the flesh died that moved on the earth. Not just local ones. Both fowl and cattle and beast and creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, and every man, all in whose nostrils was the breath of life, of all that was in dry land, died, except for those that were in the ark. And so that tells us God judges sin. And then this is Jesus talking, and it says Luke 17, and as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days of the Son of Man. They did eat, they drank, they married wives, they were given in marriage till the day that Noah entered into the ark, and the flood came and destroyed them all. So Jesus is talking about it like an historical event, and he should be our example. If we're not following Jesus' example, we are on thin ice. Okay, and for if God spared not the angels that sinned, this is 2 Peter, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into the chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment, and spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the eighth person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing in the flood upon the world of the ungodly. And the people who say it's a local flood, it's like, well, then God's a liar. He gave us a rainbow saying he's never going to do it again. There's been lots of local floods. And then this is 2 Peter chapter 2. The Lord knows how to deliver the godly out of temptation and to reserve the unjust unto the day of judgment to be punished. So what does this mean? This means that we have an important message for the world. We need to reach people with this message. There's a coming judgment. And we need to put our faith in Christ if we want to escape that judgment, just like people could have got on the ark and escaped that judgment. So we go to St. Cloud State with this message. I want to give them an opportunity to think, because I think when people start thinking, that's going to lead them to the Creator, and once they get there, they'll get to Christ. And so this is a poster I had just last week. Forgiveness and redemption. This offer expires when you do. Maybe today. Drive carefully. And is it appointed unto man once to die, and after that the judgment? And we need to let people know Jesus died. He paid the penalty for your sin. There is an afterlife. And Jesus proved it. And then I had this there too. Once upon a time, nothing exploded and turned into people. Are you being brainwashed? If you're only learning what's being presented to you in class, especially if it's a blind chance perspective government class, you are being brainwashed. And if you're only believing what's on the media, the mainstream media that only gives you one side of the story, you are being brainwashed. You need to dig. And I was at Ox and Friends, and something came up. It's like, are we better off with the internet or not? And there's one of the representatives, he says, no, we're not better off with the internet. And I thought, yeah, we are. Otherwise, we could only believe what the mainstream media told us. And there'd be a lot of stuff that we wouldn't know. So anyhow, and oh yeah, coming up on Tuesday night, and this is a good, Alex Newman, anybody know who that is? Alex Newman, he's editor for the, he edits for Epoch Times at times, and he's also the Sentinel Report, Liberty Freedom Report, Sentinel Report. He's got a big microphone. He speaks like 5 languages. He grew up around the world. He seems to have a pretty good handle on things, but he's going to be talking about transhumanism 2.0 on Tuesday night. You can go into tccsa.tc, and he's talking about how this is the oldest lie in the book. Satan's trying to get people to think that they're going to be God, and there are people who think they're going to be God. They're not going to die. And he's going to expose that, so that would be a good one. That's this next Tuesday. And then again, we got Dr. Randy Galuza, April 21st. That's going to be at 7 p.m. We could carpool around here a little after 5, I suppose, just in case the traffic's bad. Okay, I want you to put on your thinking caps, your critical thinking skills. Separate the facts from the conclusion. Okay, this is again from the textbook. A fact is a verifiable piece of information, whereas a conclusion is a judgment based upon the facts. So a fact is verifiable. Okay, the news media often mix facts with conclusions without indicating which is which. Well, so do the scientists. So I'm going to read some stuff. You have to decide, is this a fact or is this a conclusion? Okay, they found a new massive dinosaur skeleton, and it was this team recovered some 70% of the bones of Dreadnoughtus had below his head. Now, is that a fact? Who thinks that's a fact? Can that be verified? Who thinks that's a conclusion? Okay, well, they can verify it. There the bones are. So that is a fact. How about this? Some 80 million years ago, a raging torrent swept away 2 Dreadnoughtuses, perhaps already dead, before dumping them on a bed of quicksand-like sediment. In a stroke of luck for scientists, the mire swallowed the animals whole. They're about as long as a Boeing 747. Okay, so now is this a fact or is this a conclusion? That would be a conclusion. That's not a fact. You can't verify 80 million years. But it's in the same article. So you have to decide now, is this verifiable or is this an interpretation? Here's another one. And 85 feet long, weighing about 65 tons. They found this dinosaur species. Is that a fact? Or is that a conclusion? Okay, well, you can lay them out. You can lay it out, you know, and I suppose there's some interpretation in there. But how about this one? You know, how about Dreadnoughtus? It had a tail, a neck vertebrae with a diameter of over a yard. Okay, so you got a vertebrae like this. Would that be a fact? Or would that be a conclusion? Any chiropractors there? How would you like to adjust somebody like that? But yeah, you can show them the vertebrae. That would be a fact. That's what they found. How about this? 2 skeletons are evidence that the individuals were buried in sediment rapidly before their bodies fully decomposed. You notice they always have to be buried rapidly, because that's the only way a fossil forms. That dead deer on the side of the road, that's not going to turn into a fossil. That's going to get decomposed and scavenged. The only way a fossil forms is if it's laid down rapidly. Therefore, any layer of rock that has fossils in it was laid down rapidly. And that's the whole geologic column. That points strongly to a flood. Well, how about this? These 2 animals were buried quickly after a river flooded and broke through its natural levee, turning the ground into something like quicksand. Fact? Or an interpretation, a judgment? They can't prove that. How do you know it was a river? How do you know it wasn't a tidal wave? How do you know it wasn't a worldwide flood? But they just mix the facts in with the fiction, and we have to separate it. And so, yeah, that's what we need to do, is help people start thinking.
The final conclusion is very simple. Man and dinosaur lived contemporaneously, and even though they're separated by evolutionary dogma by at least 64 million years, they not only lived contemporaneously, but were caught in a worldwide flood. And this is devastating to evolutionary theory, but very supportive of the biblical record of creation as detailed in the Holy Scriptures. Thank you for standing for the truth of creation and the truth of our Savior Jesus Christ, our Creator.
Amen. Well, thank you for blazing a trail for us. This is quite an honor for me.
Thank
You're
you.
one of my heroes.
Privilege is mine. Thank you so much.
Have a blessed day. But yeah, it was a tremendous blessing to be able to interview him. Okay, so with that, I thank you so much for your attention and appreciate the attendance.